Are there any questions from last time? Okay, so when dealing with fossil fuels, we are dealing with carbon-containing compounds. And these are typically in the form of what are called hydrocarbons. Okay, so hydrocarbons literally means that in sort of your standard basic hydrocarbon is going to be a chain of carbons of various lengths. The smallest one is just one carbon atom with hydrogens on them, on it, I should say. That's methane. And then as you add carbons, the chains get longer, and each carbon is attached to a hydrogen. So that's your kind of simplest example of hydrocarbons. And as we mentioned last time, that what do these lines here represent? Energy and bonds, okay? And that involves what? The nucleus of an atom or the electrons of an atom? Electrons, okay? So each of these lines represents the sharing of electrons, which keeps those two atoms together. And then essentially when we break those bonds is when energy is released, since there's energy in the bonds. So the entire foundation of our use of fossil fuels has to do with breaking those bonds and reclaiming the energy from those bonds to do all the different things that we need to do with them. And we won't probably have time for it today, but next time we'll get into how much fossil fuels we're using, how much coal is there in the world, how much petroleum is there in the world, who's producing it, who's using it. So we'll get into all those ideas, but I want to give you a general sense of the chemistry behind these fossil fuels, and that it's really related to, in particular, that very first process that I have listed up there, which is photosynthesis. That's kind of the fundamental biological process by which these hydrocarbons were made or are currently being made. So in the diagram of the energy sources, we talked about biomass, right? So if you're burning wood for fuel, then you're utilizing the plant material that was made fairly recently. But if you're using coal or petroleum, that photosynthesis also occurred, but it was probably 200 to 300 million years ago. But nonetheless, you have to understand the process. So photosynthesis you'll often get words you're not familiar with in this class, and it's good to take those words and break them down. So everybody knows what photo means, right? That has to do with light. And synthesis is to put together. Okay, so you're combining things in some form or fashion to make something larger. So the formula for photosynthesis, and this is a summary formula. So inside a plant, there are many, many steps that it takes to undergo photosynthesis. So we're just sort of stepping back and looking at the overall outcome of it. First thing that we start with is carbon dioxide. Okay, so when I write CO2, you know there's one carbon atom with 2 oxygens attached to it. And we take 6 of those. And then 6 water molecules are also utilized. And in the process, a molecule of sugar is produced. And as a byproduct, 6 molecules of oxygen. So which of those, I wrote 4 different chemicals up there. Which one looks like it's the biggest?
Sugar.
The sugar. Okay, it is. It's this molecule has all these different atoms in it. So here's a big thing, and it's being made up from little things. So that's the synthesis part. Synthesis means building something. So if you build a house, do you have to invest any energy into that?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to put energy in. And this process also takes energy because we're taking lots of little small things, carbon dioxides and water, and we're putting them together to make a larger thing. So we have to have an energy input, and that's where the photo part comes into it. So light is used for that energy. So let's see, last time we talked about energy transduction, correct?
Yep.
What is an energy transduction?
Changes one form to another form. Changes one form of energy to another.
One form of energy to another form of energy. And that's exactly what's happening here. We're using electromagnetic radiation and we're converting it into the bonds found in the sugar molecule. Okay, so that would be chemical energy. And what do you know about any energy transduction? Fernando, since you were so keen on the second law of thermodynamics.
They're not 100% different.
They're what?
Not 100% different.
Not 100% efficient. So that means if I start off with 1,000 joules here, there's no way I'm going to get it. Maybe I'll get 100 joules of sugar. The rest is wasted. It's reflected off the plant. You can't use all of that energy. So it's not 100% efficient.
Are you pointing at the H, the chemical energy? Are you pointing at the H or just that side?
Say what?
Pointing at the H, the chemical energy? Is it the arrow? Is that
Yeah, the chemical energy is in this molecule here. That's sugar. Oxygen. Let me just write these out just in case you haven't had much chemistry. Carbon dioxide and water. So actually from this fairly simple formula, there's a lot of environmental science that goes around about this because in a couple of weeks we'll be talking about climate change, and one of the drivers of climate change is carbon dioxide. So this comes from the atmosphere. So if you have a lot of photosynthesis occurring, a lot of carbon dioxide is being sucked out of the atmosphere. And we'll talk about two other processes now that release carbon dioxide. So the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is related to the balance between photosynthesis and some other procedures or other processes. Now, why does a plant want to do this? What's the goal of why plants just do this for the heck of it? This, by the way, so photosynthesis occurs in a group of organisms called autotroph. You probably don't know what troph means.
Is that a self-feeder?
Self-feeder, exactly. Troph means to feed. And auto means by yourself, so you don't need to eat anything. You make your own food. Because what a plant will do then is use this sugar as its own energy source. It can't use light directly. It has to make a chemical that it can then burn for its own fuel. So plants don't really need anything other than some minerals in the soil. They need water, they need carbon dioxide, and they're perfectly happy on their own. They don't need they don't need animals. Okay. Now, all other organisms, now not all autotrophs do this. There are some autotrophs that live, for example, in the ocean, in the deep sea vents, that they don't use light, but they use hydrogen sulfide as their source of energy. They live in a completely dark world. And some people think actually the original life started there, and that photosynthesis is actually a secondary process. But these are, when you think of your grass or oak trees or wheat or anything else that's green and grows like a plant, that's what you should think of. Now, the plant has to use that sugar, okay, for its own energy. So I'm going to talk about that process next. But this energy is then, the plant can use the sugar and add it with some nitrogen-containing compounds and make proteins. Okay, because all organisms need proteins. Or it can add some other chemicals and form nucleic acids, which it uses for its DNA. Or add some phosphorus and make some lipids. Okay, so it's sort of an initial building block, and then other things are added so that all of the plant's needs are met. But the first need, and these can get bigger. Okay, so a plant can start putting sugars together and make starches, or make cellulose, or make larger compounds. Now, this process has been going on for hundreds of millions of years, and it's the fundamental process by which the original, whether it was phytoplankton in the oceans that gave rise to our petroleum that we're burning in our cars now, or whether it was gigantic coal swamps in the Carboniferous that formed coal, this is how it started, is this process. So this is kind of a fundamental process for understanding fossil fuels. And if this process happened 250 million years ago, then that carbon was taken out of the atmosphere 250 million years ago. So you look at a chunk of coal, it's a black rock that is the compressed remains of many, many years of plants, compressed, all the water is squeezed out, it's put under heat and under pressure until it forms a rock, but essentially it's the carbon that came out of squeezing that plant material. So that carbon came out of the atmosphere that long ago. So when you burn a chunk of coal, you're finally putting the carbon that was in the atmosphere, it was in the ground for 250 million years, and it now is back in the atmosphere again. It just was put in storage for that long. So when people talk about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because of the burning of fossil fuels, that's what they're talking about. And of course, the process of burning coal really took off in the 1700s with the Industrial Revolution. So the formation of factories, the production of steel was a major, major contributor to our burning of that fossil fuel. And that's sort of the date that people use for when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere started rising, because we started utilizing that process. All right, let's talk about what the plant does with this. Okay, if the plant doesn't die right away, it's making the sugar for a reason. Oh, and by the way, the byproduct is oxygen. It's thought that in the atmosphere a long, long time ago there wasn't much oxygen, and that when this process evolved and started happening for the first time, you start seeing oxygen in significant amounts in our atmosphere. This was called the oxygen revolution. And actually, plant life drastically changed the planet's atmosphere by putting oxygen into it. So this was essentially, the first organisms that did this were probably bacteria-like. Okay, so our current autotrophs, we still have bacteria that are autotrophs, but lots of them are complicated, you know, corn plants and oak trees and those sorts of things. The original ones back when that happened, and this is going back, you know, over 1 billion years into the history of the planet, but that actually plants sort of condition the atmosphere to make it amenable for the development of other forms of life. So we are very much dependent upon plants because of this. Oxygen also in the atmosphere forms ozone, way up in the stratosphere. It's called stratospheric ozone. Ozone is O3. And O3 absorbs ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is very dangerous. How many use tanning beds? Good. Nobody in here uses a tanning bed. That's good. That's a lot of ultraviolet radiation. Makes you tan. Some people like being real tan. But ultraviolet light damages DNA. It's generally not a good thing to spend a whole lot of time in the sun. If you do, wear sunscreen. Because there is still ultraviolet radiation that makes it down to the surface of the Earth. But if it wasn't for ozone, there would be a heck of a lot more. And cancer rates would go up. All right, so plants make the oxygen that then is converted into ozone that acts as a shield to protect all life on the planet. So that's why it's okay to be a tree hugger. Because trees are, you know, keeping us alive in a lot of different ways. You think, oh, that's really kind of like touchy-feely to be a tree hugger. But there's a good reason to be a tree hugger, because those plants are really, we wouldn't be here without plants. Okay, so that's considered sort of a byproduct of this. Now the plant will use this. And the way it uses it is it takes that oxygen that it's made, and it'll take the sugar that it made, and now what it's going to do is it's going to harvest the energy from all those bonds that it made. Okay, it's basically taking 6 carbons over here that are free individual carbons, and it's linking them together into one molecule that has all 6 in one, using the energy of the light. Now it wants to harvest that, and when it does, it basically spits back out what it put in. So it makes CO2 and water. But in so doing, it takes a very important molecule over here that's called, I'm just going to call it ADP. It stands for adenosine diphosphate. And it's going to use that energy to convert the ADP into ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay? And any work, bless you, any work that any living organism has to do, so work, right? Units for work are what? Joules or calories, okay? Any work, so if you're going to lift a piece of chalk or if you're going to lift your arm, there's a finite amount of joules that I had to use to do that I can measure. I've done work. I've used force over a distance, so I've done work. Any work done by cells requires ATP. Does all the, sorry, let's write that differently. So ATP is the universal source of energy for all biological work. All the food you eat eventually gets channeled down and converted into ATP for you to do anything with it. I don't care if it's hamburgers, French fries that are undigestible from McDonald's, a vanilla shake or anything. It has to get converted. And this is actually why plants do photosynthesis. They do photosynthesis so they can make sugar only such that they can break that down to make ATP. Is there a transduction occurring here? What did we say? What was the kind of energy we found in here? Chemical. And what's the energy here? It's also chemical. I mean, so we actually have, that is chemical, but as soon as we put it to work, like movement, then it's kinetic energy. And if I'm moving my arm and I can see it, it's macrokinetic. So it's that kind of kinetic energy. So, but anything an organism does, except for dying, just in order for a cell to maintain and live, it has to use energy just to exist and stay alive. As soon as it stops using energy, it's essentially dead. So a cell has to maintain a internal chemical composition that's different from the outside. That requires little molecular pumps. All those pumps take energy. So it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it's actually on a microscopic scale pumping fluids and staying alive. Okay, so that's critical for that. So that process is called, this whole thing is cellular respiration. So all organisms do cellular respiration. Now, autotrophs do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Get that in your notes. That's a nice quiz question.
Say that again.
All organisms, well, no, autotrophs do, since I said cellular respiration occurs in all living things, and autotrophs are living things, so therefore autotrophs have to undergo cellular respiration. So autotrophs perform both cellular respiration and photosynthesis.
So all living things.
All living things do cellular respiration. Autotrophs do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, are you photosynthetic? Wouldn't that be nice? Just lay in the sun instead of eating? Go to the beach? Oh, I'm getting fat here laying in the sun. That's what plants do. Now, the other category of organisms that can't make their own food are called, Yana,
I'm sorry, I
what are
wasn't
they
listening.
called?
I didn't hear what you said, I was
What-
writing, sorry.
The organisms that, I figured since you knew what an autotroph was. Heterotrophs.
Yes, I did know that, I just forgot.
Hetero means other eating versus self-eating. Okay, a heterotroph is everything that can't make its own fuel from simple molecules. You know this very well because you have to eat. You can't just lay in the sun. You have to eat something else. That's the hetero.
Can't make its own fuel for what?
Can't make its own fuel. Can't make its own food. A heterotroph. Do heterotrophs undergo cellular respiration? Yeah, because I said why. Because everything that's alive undergoes cellular respiration. So heterotrophs, they do lots of different things, but of these two chemical reactions, all they do is cellular respiration. And where do they get their sugar?
Photosynthesis.
Hmm?
From photosynthesis.
Do they do their own photosynthesis?
From other
They consume.
things.
What they consume. So you eat lettuce because it's an autotroph. And either you eat plants directly or you eat something that ate a plant. So when you eat a hamburger, that cow ate plants. So you're indirectly getting the energy from the plants it ate. Questions? You guys ready to bolt, huh? Gonna keep you long? All right. Bring me those questions and comments for your capstone next time.
Yes.
See you later.